From Immersive Labs, this is Cyber Humanity.
Hello again, everyone. I'm your host, Chris Pace, joined by a whole load of people who've actually been to an office.
Woohoo!
Guys, congratulations.
Hello. Actually, in an office.
Yeah, how was it? I heard the air conditioning was amazing.
Air conditioning was absolutely spot on.
Really
Hottest
good.
day of the year in the office. Perfect.
I was in my
What's
shed
ice
at the bottom
creams?
of the garden. It was an absolute hot box. So I kind of actually sort of wished I'd gone into the office.
I forgot how much I miss people.
Talking to people.
We all know that's not true. Anyway, welcome Max Vetter, Kev Breen and Paul Bentham.
Hello.
Hello.
In these podcasts, we try to look at cybersecurity from a human point of view, social engineering, hacker motivations, cyber crises, and more. These podcasts usually come in two flavors. Either we're ranting about themes close to the hearts of security types, or we are chatting about threat and security stuff from recent weeks, and this episode is another one of those. And we are starting off, we talked a little bit last week actually about the thin blue line, and we're going to talk a bit again this week about the thin blue line. So Blue Leaks, you may have heard about 270 gigabytes of police data that has been... Police data is not really as specific, perhaps, as we'll get into the specifics of what that was in a moment. What's happened is that a Wikileaks-esque organization called, is it DDoS Secrets? I think it's DDoS Secrets.
DDoS Secrets.
There's only one S. There's only one S, so
Secrets.
that's why it's confusing. But it's DDoS Secrets. Have essentially leaked or released this information. They put it on a public website and also shared that through Twitter. And Twitter have now taken the extraordinary step of blocking those accounts and stopping them from sharing that website and that information. So, what do we make of all what's the thing that's interesting about this, other than the fact that it's a pretty gigantic leak of personally identifiable information? But what else is it that's interesting about the story?
Well, I'd say that one of the most interesting things is how irresponsibly it's been leaked. I mean, I'm sure that whatever's in the data is there, like, was leaked for good reasons. They've just dumped it. There's no filtering. There's personal data in it all over the place, like records of people's criminal convictions. It's a million files, and it's got everything that you shouldn't be dumping on the internet. That's not fair.
But isn't that very WikiLeaks territory? Isn't that what WikiLeaks do? I mean, it wasn't the Panama Papers. I don't think the Panama Papers are all that bothered about where personally identifiable information appeared. I don't remember this being a thing before, so why would it matter now?
Yeah, they say it's the more transparent alternative to WikiLeaks, which, WikiLeaks is pretty transparent in terms of leaking stuff. So they're suggesting they're leaking even more than WikiLeaks did. And in terms of the files of law enforcement, does that include files about people who are informing on people or particularly specially victims and everything else? So yeah, really kind of worrying that this data's out there.
You can see the comparison to the Panama Papers, but in those situations, you're not putting people's lives at risk by leaking that information. This could have, like Max is saying, police informants. It could have people that were accused but never went to trial. It's just everything. 10 years worth of data from 200 police departments just dumped on the internet.
Yeah.
We don't. One of the other problems is that we don't know. There doesn't seem to be. I mean, no one really seems to be talking as yet about what is in there. We know that it includes names and email addresses and phone numbers and various images and text and video and all kinds of other stuff. There's a. I guess the argument might be that the volume of material means that it's obvious that there will be, sensitive data in that collection. Twitter's response is interesting. They almost immediately banned those accounts from sharing that public website. Do we know why?
Twitter says these files were contained illegally and therefore they're distributing illegal content, which violates Twitter's terms of service. They won't support that. So that was the reason they did that. I think the reason we don't know so much about what's in here is that shortly after that leak, it was visible on the website. The website understandably got hammered by a lot of people, and it's currently not serving anything. So that data is not visible in the public domain anymore, from a quick search of what was originally released.
What's kind of interesting about this is that the compromise Brian Krebs has got hold of it, and he's saying that it was breaching NetCentral, which was used, a single user account on NetCentral was compromised. And that's been used by all these departments and fusion centers, and that's the source of the leak, which is kind of interesting. And another thing that's kind of interesting about this is that, unlike most of the attacks that we are talking about recently, it's not a ransomware example. So at least it's a bit more interesting than yet another ransomware. They haven't encrypted all those machines, and they've not done a ransom demand. They've just dumped the data. So whilst it is grossly irresponsible to do that, of such sensitive data for police and law enforcement operations, at least it's interesting for us to talk about.
But somebody has obviously accessed that data. I mean, it feels like it's speculation, but it feels like a breach rather than a hack in this way.
That's the thing, we don't have all the details yet, but from the details we do have, it does seem more like it was somebody inside with privileged access who in WikiLeaks-style took it out, rather than a hack breach style of compromise. It's still it's a compromise either way, but I don't think it was like they were hacked and breached. I think I
read that the National Fusion Centre Association said it was a compromised account, so that would suggest to me that it wasn't a militia, like an insider actor, but actually that somehow somebody, probably password reuse, I guess, and used it that way.
But that feels to me like we do have a problem then about the rationale that Twitter gave for removing that link that had published that data. Because the Twitter guideline that they were saying it was to do, they were a contravention of a hacked material. That's the rule. Like, you can't share hacked material, and the suggestion could be here that this could be a whistleblower. It could be somebody internally who's made that data available. I don't think that's the same. I don't think that's the same as that data necessarily being hacked. So I think there is a deeper discussion here about
Twitter's behaviour.
Yeah, about Twitter doing what they're doing and the potential reasons why.
Do the US have a equivalent of our Section D notice in the UK? So government can issue Section D notices that kind of ban from the printed publication from publishing information. Of course, that didn't work that well in the Snowden situation, but I wonder if the FBI have issued a US equivalent Section D on Twitter for this and threatened them
gag order,
with something.
That may never seem to work on the internet anyway, because you just go and Google what people are saying. Oh, there's a Section D order on it.
Unless under Trump they've got more effective at it. Maybe under Trump's administration he's got more control, for want of a better word, over Twitter, and has issued a notice to say this is law enforcement, it's sensitive information, it's putting lives at risk and affecting operations. You will block or else
So, XYZ. According to DDoS Secrets, their statement on BlueLeaks is 24 years of data from over 200 police departments, fusion centres and training support resources hacked by Anonymous. That's how they've branded it.
That's attribution that they surely can't really give.
Well,
and also then in that case, what is hacked? An insider with access to that information deciding to do something with it. And also interesting, the context for Twitter here, if we go back to that policy, so that this is a policy they call their distribution of hacked material policy, where they say that they don't condone attempts to compromise or infiltrate computer systems for malicious purposes. We don't actually know that that's what's happened here. So what are Twitter doing the attribution now and deciding that's what's happened, and therefore then blocking whether that stuff can be shared or not? And that feels like the thin end of the wedge to me.
Does seem strange why they've.
It does. It's interesting because it's already in the public domain. So, like, everybody's talking about this. There's nothing new. So allowing them to maintain their voice, I don't know. Like, unless they were planning, even then, like, they can go to any other social media site. They run their own domain. So yeah, it's weird. It's an interesting, and we're seeing a lot more of Twitter taking a really hard stance on policing what people can say. Like they did it with Trump for right or for wrong, but they hid one of his tweets. Like, I didn't agree with his tweet, but hiding it feels like, it's an odd world we live in, and Twitter has a lot of control in this world.
The other suggestion seems to have been that, well, I think mistakenly, Twitter were also at one point saying that the site that it was linking to was risky, was like at risk of infecting people. So I mean, it's a little bit like they almost couldn't make up their mind. They knew that they didn't want people to go there, and they were trying to find the way that it was that would enable them to stop that. It feels I'm not a conspiracy theorist by nature, but it just all seems a little bit strange to me, given that the Panama Papers were all over Twitter. And Paul, I take your point, but I think they are comparable. You're talking about large caches of data leaked out of an organization and made available to the general public through a website. I'm struggling to see the difference.
We're also seeing now, so I've just checked, so the DDoS Sensor website definitely not serving it, but there are already 2 or 3 mirrors of other people who have got it before it went down, and they're now actively sharing this. So this stuff is well and truly out in the wild.
Have you been through it, Kev? Have you seen what's in there?
I haven't looked at any of it.
All you have to do is follow the hashtag BlueLeaks on Twitter, and you'll see lots of screenshots of data in those files. Of
I just tried to do this.
Things basically that the police do.
I just tried to do this, but because I can't spell, I did leaks like the vegetable, and there's not many people are tweeting about blue.
No one's growing blue leaks now.
But the collective says they have 2 criteria for published data. The data has a public interest, and it's got to be capable of being verified, whatever that means. So, then what happens to sensitive data that shouldn't be shared? And, they do talk about them being journalists, but journalists will typically make sure that there isn't data that is harming people, and it is of the public interest. But then there's quite a lot of movement there in what is actually of a public interest and what can.
There's no way they filtered all that to determine what is actually valid or useful. They dumped it. They had a platform. They went with it.
No, exactly.
What I love is that they call themselves a transparency collective. Yeah. Who calls themselves a collective? The Borg.
The Anonymous.
The Borg are a collective.
So you're referring to them as mindless drones?
No. You said that.
Be very careful.
You
Paul.
said that. I just said the collective's a strange term to call yourselves. Like, hey, we're the podcast collective. That's weird.
I think another thing I think is interesting is we're suddenly very focused on how the data is being shared. We're very focused on who should be able to share it, whether people should be able to see it, and whether it's sensitive or not. And yet Brian Krebs has told us the root of it, and we're not really talking about them at all. So we know where the problem lies. There's clearly an issue with securing data at some point in this chain, and it's a supply chain thing, right? So it's a third party, it's caused by a third party, and the leak itself is kind of distracting us from the fact that an organization has allowed this to happen. That's the reality. A law enforcement organization whose job it is to secure, to protect, and they can't even look after that data. I mean, why is that the conversation that's not being had?
Have you been to netcentral.com? Go to netcentral.com and have a look at the website that must have been built in 1998 by the looks of it. It is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it has got a copyright 1998 on it. So this, and I'm not old, but this is from before I went to university. And I think I might know why they were compromised.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to get a closer look at the way that some of that technology actually worked and what it was doing and how it was held together, because I think it feels like, from my point of view, that might be where the story is.
But you can call them toll free on 877-993-6433. Extension 101. Who uses extension 101?
Toll free anymore.
The people who deserve the real blame here is whoever in the police and fusion centres decided that this was the right technology to build
but you know where this is heading. This is heading to, it turns out that it's like Uncle Bubba's nephew's cousin that runs Net Central, and so they've contracted out to these guys, and they're all taking kickbacks off the website development. That's what we're going to find out.
Since 1998.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the real investigation.
It's just a shell company.
Can somebody do this? Come on.
Yeah, we need to get on to...
We need to on Net Central. Is there even a CVE about this? What is Net Central? Is it a CMS? Is it just a bunch of like bespoke web dev?
I think it's just a standard like HTML ASPX.
They are not. They are literally not mentioned anywhere except in reference to this hack. They're like almost like a shell company.
This is so weird.
So odd. Something's up here. Something's fishy.
Actually, if you look at their website back in 2004, which is basically the same structure as the one they've got now, they do talk about our software is currently being used by Fortune 500 companies, financial institutions, small and medium-sized businesses, etc., etc., etc. Like
there's nothing else about them on the internet.
It's a CMS. It is. NetSite sites are easy to maintain. You can cut and paste, and you can maintain and update your website. And to be honest, it doesn't actually surprise me. I've seen government sites. They are, 10 years old, like legacy systems that's too expensive to rip out. So they just keep like playing with the same dodgy CMS. And like, it's no surprise to me that they've been compromised because it's like so old. And
obviously in this case, it's that system connecting to stuff that really matters. That's what's happened in this case, obviously.
It's all right though. You can send to a friend.
What do you mean you can send to? Oh yeah, send to a friend. Send to a friend. One of their links.
They've got quite the Twitter following.
Have they?
No, they
both
joined in March.
Founders.
They joined in March 2010. They have one follower.
Is it anonymous?
That would be so good. That would be so good.
One follower.
We're doing live.
I mean, even I've got more.
I know. Watch me OSINT the shit out of this.
Oh, there's the expletive warning.
Right, that might be the actual story, not someone got hold of the data and did something with it, but a number of law enforcement agencies are incapable of protecting it.
There's an important part of this, which is as part of the Black Lives Matter protests, Anonymous reportedly stole this data because of that, and we've seen Anonymous in the past do various things with the Middle East protests and things like that. So, and this is reportedly trying to show other data that shows that black males or black people are more likely to get killed by police in the US than anyone else, and that's the side of it that is really interesting. And I haven't seen any data that shows that, but transparency in the police in the US is definitely shown to not be there, and they're not collecting that data. So this is maybe the way that Anonymous is trying to get that data out there, which should be supported, but again, as long as it's not hurting people who have sensitive information in that data as well.
Yeah, I feel I have to agree. I feel as though the methods or the mindset of law enforcement should be up for examination. And so if there's things in that cache of data that help us see those things, I think that's right.
Definitely.
I think the problem is where it's then where it's sucked in, in some cases, innocent private individuals. I think that is where the problem has come here, and that you're right. That shouldn't have been allowed to happen. All right, I'm introducing a new feature.
Ooh.
Are you ready? Now, see, when I suggest a new feature, people are on the edge of their seats with bated breath.
Mine was sarcastic.
It's a new feature that nobody's prepared for.
The new feature is the Random Ransom Generator. And we're going to do this every week. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to take a closer look at ransomware gangs who are either attempting to extort money from people, and who are they attempting to extort money from, or we're going to look more closely at ransomware attacks that are going on in the moment. So we are going to try and basically talk about a ransomware attack a week, which could end up being really, really difficult, or we might, like this week, find that we've actually got way too much to talk about. So what's going on in the world of ransomware? Well, the Maze cartel, as they will now be known, henceforth be known, have released, made what they're calling. I love this. They're calling an official announcement. So it's an official announcement from the Maze group. It's not an announcement from. It's not an announcement from some other ransomware group. It's an official announcement from them, and they have released a statement saying that they're very disappointed with the number of companies who are trying to decrypt files themselves. They are stopping negotiating with them, and they are trying to decrypt the files themselves. I mean, what are they thinking? It's just
How very dare they.
It's just disrespectful. But we also know, of course, that these cartels are now getting into this thing where they essentially are using these kinds of tactics to attempt to extort their victims, either for more money or try to force them to make the payments of the ransom quicker. And Kev has been digging around on the dark web, and I think, Kev, you've got a bit more information about some of the companies that have been. Attacked or are pushing back on Maze, and what's going on? What are Maze saying?
So I've got access to Maze's news site, the Maze team official press releases, as they like to call it, and kind of like we talked about, where they say that companies are fighting back and they're hiring negotiators. Just a couple of quick examples. So ST Engineering, apparently the negotiator they've hired lied to us and to ST Engineering about their Australia-sized security hole in their perimeter.
Can I just ask a question here? So this negotiator thing, I think this is the first time I've heard. I mean, obviously, it seems kind of obvious because it's a ransom. You would think that hiring a negotiator might be a smart move, but I don't think I've heard this up to now.
I'd hire Russell Crowe.
Is that a late 90s film reference?
Yeah, it is a late 90s film reference. Yeah,
I'm not sure. Like they're not native English speakers, so this may be lost in translation. We do know companies hire in, like, if you've been affected by ransomware, you might bring in a third party like Deloitte to do the management for you. You might offload any negotiation for paying the ransom to whichever like vendor you brought in to manage your.
The consultants that you've hired or whatever.
So it might just be that rather than negotiator, but they're not from. Like, they might not have that same terminology.
I was thinking we just identified a gap in the market there. We could set ourselves up as ransomware negotiators.
So we just pay.
Yeah, Paul would be just like, just pay it. I don't know what. Watch me. I'm amazing at negotiating. Hello, yes, we will pay.
So there's actually there's a company who claims to be able to decrypt anything. What they actually do is they charge you the ransom and then go and pay the ransom.
Is this a company called Time.ai?
Allegedly.
Sorry, allegedly, in case they're thinking of suing us.
Yeah.
Again.
It's brilliant. And I think it was either Maze or Revel that actually outed them for that behaviour, because they said they'd put a press statement out saying we could do anything, and Maze came out and said, well, actually, no, you were just buying it from us.
But they do talk about negotiators in the specific statement where they say, if you're hiring negotiators from local government, listening to them will just not help you. They just want to profit from doing it. They're not going to help you actually stop the breach.
Yeah, they're very anti-government. So that's Maze.
So the implication is that if you've called law enforcement and law enforcement is acting as your negotiator, then Maze are saying, we don't like them or want to talk to them, and you shouldn't listen to them.
It's quite interesting. They go into the losses. Lawsuits and fines vary from 18 million to 47 million. They're giving advice, sort of basically like, well, this is what you could do if you go through all the normal stuff, and then large companies lose 250 million so basically just pay it.
So I think this is just a massive PR
that's the Paul approach, isn't it? See, they've listed all the reasons to pay it, and so Paul was like, pay it. How hard could it be?
I helped them with that. But I think this is a massive PR campaign for Maze, though. I didn't help them with that. I think this is a massive PR campaign because I think they dropped the ball this week. So they accidentally ransomed the wrong company.
Yeah.
So they thought they had the Canadian Standards Association, but actually they hacked a New York architectural firm instead. So I think it's all like, hey, don't look over here, look over here. Like, great PR.
And I think Maze have just like, revenues are up. Business is brisk. It's a lot of plates to spin. They've got a lot of new people. So it's gonna. These oversights are occasionally going to happen, but I'm sure their loyal customers will understand. As they go through this time of transition into the cartel. I'm sure their loyal customers will understand. That they're doing their best to extort them in the way that only they can.
Since I last looked, Maze have announced a new client, WorldNet Telecommunications, and they've offered up a zip file full of social security numbers as proof.
Proof of life. You see, back to Russell Crowe, 2000s, not 90s. Just so you know, proof of life. They've offered proof of life for the data. I love it.
Columbus Metro Federal Credit Union are also listed as a new client. Their proofs
I love the terminology.
An online
Yeah, it's great. That they've recruited them as a client. I love it.
So, do you think they've got inside sales doing some business development?
So that's Maze. Switching over to Revel or Sodnikibi, who are definitely Paul's favourite group.
I don't know that I've got favourites. I am actually got quite a lot of respect.
They are your favourite.
I've got quite a lot of respect for Maze doing this whole like treating us like clients. I think it's nice.
So. I think. What's
They've
interesting
leveled up.
about it? Yeah, what's interesting about it though is it's back to something that we hear floated around a lot. You know, there's a business of cybercrime and there's model
This is
and
it,
affiliates
isn't
model. But that actually this kind of almost marketing kind of proves that there really genuinely is a business model that they are applying. And they also now are beginning to see, actually, the more public shaming we do, maybe the more likely it is that they get paid, and they recognize that. So now they're investing energy in publicly shaming the companies that they're ransoming, when you might have been able to get away with this before and not being publicly shamed. But now they're going to, if you don't put your hands up, they're going to out you.
I felt quite sorry for the bosses, the CEOs, CISOs of those companies that are being ransomed, because I can imagine them being like righteously indignant. I ain't paying no ransomware. And then I'm like, this is just not going to go. Just pay it.
The FBI have recently changed their stance as well, haven't they? I'm sure I saw something recently with the FBI saying, actually, your decision whether you want to pay the ransom or not.
Have they really? After they said there was like an act of terror?
Depends who you're ransoming. Yeah.
Oh, have we heard anything about Trump?
Nothing.
Weekly check.
No, still nothing.
Just going to be the elections in November, do you think? Day before the elections?
Yeah. Sodnikibi's Happy Blog, as they like to call it.
They are my favourites.
How jolly.
And I think we've spoken about this before, but if you don't pay the ransom and all negotiations fail, what Sodnikibi do is they put it all up for auction. So all the data that you had is up for auction. So their current auctions, intercardinc.com.
Oh yeah, these guys, 40 gigs of spicy data.
The start price is 100,000 US. There's 2 days left on that. No bids.
Buy it now for 500 though.
Buy it now for 500. Fraser Wheeler, Courtney LLP.
Who's buying it? Like what? If you're spending 6 figures.
The data owner. So they're pricing it. This is brilliant. It's like a great pricing strategy, right? You've got a target company. They've got $1 billion of revenue a year. You price it at 100K, whatever. You've got a target company that has 100K of revenue. You charge them 1,000. Like, just enterprise pricing. It's brilliant. Great deal. I'm going to be on to our chief revenue officer about that.
Why wouldn't you wait and just buy it
on the auction?
Yeah, right.
So don't pay the ransom.
Just buy it back via the auction.
If you're the only one who can
I
get
suspect
it.
they've thought about this. They're pretty good at it. I imagine it's cheaper to pay the ransom than buy the auction.
Do you think no one would buy the auction if it wasn't the original company, though, would it?
So this is
it's only the original company, surely, this point.
Well, competitors would pay it.
This one's got,
or other groups to exploit it.
This one's got 14 days left. It's 10 million on the blitz price, 1 million on the opening.
What's the blitz price?
That's the buy it now price. This is the database of Vera, Megan, Marcus, LLP. The size of the archive. So they're a leading provider of counsel for technology, science, and growth enterprises, specializing in intellectual property law. The size of the archive is 1.2 terabytes, includes all internal documents of the company, electronic correspondence, patent agreements, business plans, projects, patents in the field of internet technologies and equipment development from companies including Asus, Toshiba, Seagate, Nissan, LG, Daimler, Chrysler, and more, selling exclusively to one person.
Okay, we are heading to Australia now. An advisory has been released by the Australian government, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, and the Australian Critical Infrastructure Centre. So this is a pretty big deal. And the advisory details tactics, techniques, and procedures identified during an investigation of a cyber campaign targeting Australian networks. And principally, it seems to be Australian governments and companies that are being targeted by what they call a sophisticated state-based actor. They even go into detail there and say that most of this is happening through compromising public-facing infrastructure using a particular unpatched particular piece of software, and then there are other vulnerabilities as well that are being leveraged. So, what do we think? There's tons in here, and there's tons of stuff in here about the techniques as well. I guess that the starting point for me is this another advisory because they feel like by giving an advisory it might help businesses to protect themselves better, or it's looking to force patching of these particular kinds of vulnerabilities? Is this the kind of public service that they're doing?
I wonder if there's some politics in it as well. This is not a ransomware gang. This is not script kiddies. This is, I'm not going to say APT group, but I will say that it feels very state actor to me. Like there's so much sustained, coordinated, patient time. Whoever's doing this has got the funding, the background, the resources, the patience, and the sort of motivation to target the Australian. And I don't think any attribution's been thrown around.
No,
but
a few people did keep saying, "Oh, there's something about China."
Did the Australian government didn't throw that? Did they?
The Australian government
I think there was
shots haven't been fired.
The old sources. Yeah, okay.
So,
but it's brilliant. This advisory is absolutely, I mean, it just goes through all the steps. They're like released at TLP white so you can share it around. And I guess they've done that so that they are a strong player within the community, like Australia, key member of the Five Eyes community. If this is happening in Australia, it might be happening in New Zealand, Canada, Britain, the US. I think it's part of the community of sharing. The reason why they've done this level of, I don't think it's targeted internally because frankly the answer is like patch your sodding servers. But the TTP of the threat actor here, I think, is super interesting. How they're like reusing all the, I think it's called a copy. Are they calling it a copy and paste? Is that what
copy and paste compromises? They're calling it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the. I mean, so this is a 48-page document, and it goes through a lot of detail, and everything's fully aligned to MITRE, which I love to see because it just makes it really easy for me to see. But yeah, so the title, copy-paste compromise, derived from the actor's heavy use of proof of concept, exploit code, web shells, and other tools copied almost identically from open source. And
this is a bit like when my coders code, isn't it? They go onto Stack Overflow, they copy and paste some code, and then they get in. Hey, I'm a coder. Is that what you're saying, Kev? They're just copying and pasting exploits from proof of concept code across the internet.
Yeah. So we've seen a boom in the number of CVEs issued. We've seen a boom in the number of responsible disclosures. The lockdown has forced a lot of people to have a lot more time, including bug hunters and people of that nature. So we're seeing a lot more of these kind of compromises coming out. So before, while you're a state actor, you might have had a team developing these. You can actually save that resource, wait for these things to come out. It also means you can actually try and avoid some of the attribution. If I'm writing custom tooling and it's only going to you, like you can identify me. If I'm taking the same tool that's used by other APTs, by other script kiddies, by everybody, like it makes attribution really hard from a tooling perspective. Then you have to rely on infrastructure. So this report has two edges, and like this is the same for a lot of these reports. In one instance, by releasing this report, the operators, the APT group, or who the state-sponsored actor, whoever it is, they're going to have to burn all of their infrastructure. Like that's done. That's not a small amount of stuff to tear down and to bring back up again. So you're actually going to delay them. The other side of that is you're going to force them to start changing TTPs. So you lose some visibility of that, and that's a fine balance. And I think they've done the right thing here because it's not just like one company being targeted, because it's a lot of people. Sharing this information allows people to find it, identify it, start putting stuff in place. And if you weren't on their known list of victims, you can use all this data to identify whether you were a victim as well.
There's so much in here as well that's just really interesting. Like how many different attack vectors that were used, whether it's a malicious Word file, a malicious PowerPoint file, a
SharePoint vulnerability, Kev, a SharePoint vulnerability. Yeah.
Kev loves
And it said SharePoint vulnerability from 2019. It suggests they're still updating SharePoint. So that's good. That's good to know.
And I think it's fascinating, this whole report, and I'd love to like read all 48 pages. I haven't read them all though. Way too much.
I read through it and I grab bits and pieces, and like there's a lot of interesting things in here. Like I'm really happy to see this level of report coming out, and like I said, I love
perfect, isn't it?
with MITRE.
What I'm actually really impressed / surprised about is that the government have managed to, or the Australian government have managed to attribute all of those attacks to a single actor. This looks like, multiple years worth of different attack vectors, whether it's the Citrix exploit or a SharePoint compromise or this Telerik initial access vector or, whatever, word malware, blah, blah, blah. Like there's so much going on, all attributed back to a single actor. I think it's fascinating.
I think also what's interesting here is that, sorry, Kevin, we'll let you talk in a minute. I think
Don't let him talk.
I think also what's interesting here is that it gives the kind of context for patching that we're always talking about. Like, how do I know that I'm prioritizing this patch or not? Information like this is perfect to enable you to make those decisions in an intelligent way.
And I think that's an important distinction that the report doesn't necessarily see. So reading this report, we saw this stuff from 2019. It's very easy for us to say, well, why haven't they patched? We don't know that this exploit didn't happen like 2-3 days after those patches were released because we don't have that data.
You're saying that this might be... No, I mean, the way that they've launched this, that they've under sustained attack, they're not saying we've been under sustained attack for the last 18 months. I think they're saying it feels like there's a recency, an urgency in it.
Agreed. I'm just saying it's we don't know, so
yeah, no,
it's
true,
very easy to judge them and go, oh, they haven't patched. Like we don't know, especially with the Citrix things, because Citrix didn't release patches for months, and they were vulnerable. So
I think all round we can really commend the Australian government for putting this amount of information out there. It's really interesting for us to see, really interesting for us to talk about, and super helpful for the community. And like following standards, like mapping it all to the MITRE techniques, just absolutely makes it perfect for us to use in proper, like actually use this information intelligently to make sure that our companies are well defended.
I think that's everything, because we've had these conversations before looking at stuff that's been released by intelligence agencies
Good old Pebble
about
Dash.
cyber threats, and we're like, we don't really know what this is telling us. But the minute that you put in the MITRE tactic or the MITRE technique, like you say, it's the standards that make this powerful. Not in some cases even the information itself. It's the aligning of it to a standard that if we can continue to do this moving forward, will at least give people a framework to legitimately hang intelligence off. And because I don't think we've been at this place up to now.
No, and as a network defender who wasn't a target of like any Australian, like I'm not in Australia, so I wasn't these targets, but I can very quickly look through all those MITRE techniques, all those T numbers, and go, where do I have overlaps in my organization? Like I can immediately go and check those very specific points in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, true. Maybe we should start a campaign and make every victim of some sort of cyber attack publish something of this style, like that it becomes mandatory. Not that they're fined, GDPR, blah, 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 or whatever. Like actually, like publish something interesting, or that part of the fine that they have to pay is to a company that goes in and publishes it in a really useful, shareable way without compromising their own information, etc. But that tells us as InfoSec pros that what we can learn from that attack on that company.
And there shouldn't be anything to stop them anonymizing up to a point. It's not like we read this and we were like, oh, we know every organization that was, attacked or compromised. We don't know that. They haven't needed to tell us that. They told us the relevant software. They told us the techniques. They told us the vulnerabilities. They told us the attack vectors. Like that's the kind of stuff that people need. And you're right. If you asked me, would I rather that BA had to pay a fine of hundreds of millions, or that they had to release, detailed information about how that breach happened, I think B is actually a lot more useful
Absolutely.
in terms of protecting other people.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's a positive note to end on.
That's a great note to end on. Well done, Australia, and everybody should follow that example.
Yes. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe, rate, and comment wherever you get your audio content. And if you want to know more about Immersive Labs, you can find us at immersivelabs.com or follow us on Twitter at Immersive Labs UK. Until next time, from all of us, goodbye.
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 Bye.